All right, well, here we are. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome online and in person to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event. A Decolonial University is more than workshops and a reading list, facilitated by Pierre-Paul, who's here with us today and who you'll meet shortly. I just wanted to let you know that we are streaming to YouTube live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And if you're new to fourth space, we wanted to let you know what we do here. Basically, we collaborate with our university community, students, faculty, staff, alum, and their partners, industry and community partners throughout the city and beyond, to help mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating moments of engagement, co-creating activities that allow us to come together and connect and explore the ideas, the research, and the initiatives in development across the university. And we do this in a hybrid manner. So I see that today we have a lot of online participants. Some people are streaming into the space, for space proper as well, for this workshop and this conversation. So thanks again for joining us on all those channels. I'll just invite you, I'm sure Shazleen will speak to this because as your facilitator, she's gonna kind of lay out the rules of engagement, but we do welcome you turning on your video and participating using your voice if you're online and kind of like jumping into the conversation that way. And if you rather stay more behind the scenes, you're more than welcome to, I guess, as well. The chat is activated for you. Okay, that's it for me. Hi, Shez.
Oh, hello. So hi, everyone. I know we have folks online and then we have a smaller group in person. So what I had in mind for this is really to have a conversation. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so I want you to do what you need to do to feel comfortable and safe in this space. And in terms of a breakdown, in a second, we're able to see the slides. And I will share those with you as well so that you can focus on our conversation and not feel like you're on a note-taking assignment. And the idea truly is for me first to kick it off and bring it up to you to understand what brings you into this space, what are your dreams, your aspirations, but also the systemic struggles and level of oppression that you're coming in from, and what would be a beautiful way for you to feel empowered in this conversation. So I want to open up this way so that whatever we end up co-creating along the way is extremely relevant to your life experience. And maybe if you're coming in as an activist, as a scholar, as a worker, as a student, you have a very clear picture of how to leverage the power of this space into something actionable in your life, where you see yourself as this incarnate force of change and transformation at your own scale, right? I don't want to do like one of my profs used to call intellectual masturbation. It's truly, we do things that have depth and merit. And for me, it's to help you have the simplest of canvases to have maximum depth. So it doesn't need to be complicated for it to be revolutionary. And I also want to factor in the emotional and connective load that can come with this, right? So not feeling overwhelmed and really having a clear sense of purpose and direction. So that's kind of the idea. So as I said, I used the title of, Decolonial University / education is more than workshops and a reading list. There's been a lot of noise and clout around those two categories as vessels for change, and they come with their strengths and their limitations. And I want us to have a holistic approach. So what are all the things that are not happening systemically today that are in our power to institute? Because when we look at a systemic problem or oppression, it requires systemic countermeasures. So we need to be as holistic as the reality that we're here to, subvert in many regards. So if we move on to the next slide, you will see just a little bit of that breakdown that I was mentioning to you. So to flesh it out a bit more, we're going to start off with this understanding of the worst and the best and the decolonial experience that you've had. So what is missing and what are you aspiring to? So in a second, we're going to jump off and you're going to see two interactive slides where we'll have those prompts for you. And I'll give you a minute to hold space to reflect, because I'm sure not everybody spends every waking hours thinking about those things in the same way that I might sometimes. So I want to give you an opportunity to really reflect. And there's no wrong answer. Whatever is honest is the most powerful leverage for us to implement in this space. And after that, switching off to your expectations for today. So when you came in, what do you feel would be the most amazing outcome or experience that you could have? And I will make it so that we can hold each other accountable to that standard without any pressure, but just having that level of depth and simplicity in how we move forward. After that, I'm just going to have a little bit of a spiel for a minute to share with you my findings and my suggestions and my framework around, okay, what are the gaps in higher education, right? And also, I'm all about solution. Thus, I'm going to share the real decolonial metrics, so ways that we can understand what is broken, and off of that, create a systemic countermeasure so that we can keep track of our progresses. And I'm challenging the existing metrics that a lot of us may or may not be familiar with, so that we can go deeper, but also simpler. And as we do that, I have different examples of amazing human beings. I had a hard time kind of, bringing it down because there's so many beautiful souls, but I wanted to highlight very specific profiles of human to you all as a standard of what's possible, so that as we talk about it, it's one thing to feel like, okay, overarchingly, I get it, but I feel so small in my ability to institute change. And also those people are very far and removed from my reality. So I want us to be able to bridge that gap. And so as a means to wrap up that section where I have examples from all walks of life that may or may not speak to your private experience, then I look back to the academy and how do we correlate those two things so that it doesn't feel like it's an extremist approach, right? We understand the brokenness, but not our ability to supplant it. And then the idea is, as I'm gonna time myself to make sure that this section isn't too long, the whole point is you. So then how do we bring this back to you? We may be illuminated in our minds, but then in actionability, we may feel very, very small. So the whole thing is coming full circle back to what you said at the beginning, the worst and the best. How are you an implement for both in terms of recovering from the worst and enforcing the best, and also factoring in your personal expectations and desires and motivations, right? So that's the whole point. If it can change or impact a life, intellectual privilege is not a tool of social transformation. So that's why for me, it's important to have the actionability piece with the theory and also with you always at the center of everything. So yeah, and at any point, I am, Doug and Anna, let me know if somebody's trying to come in online and has some comments or questions also in the chat. I don't want to forget anyone. But if not, I feel we can jump off to the Mentimeter. So the link that I sent over, and you'll see as I was sharing with you, it's 2 interactive slides. For those of us that are here in person, what I'm gonna do is I will give everyone a minute first to answer online, and I'm just gonna facilitate, our conversation through what they say, and I will just kick it off to you. And I don't want to put y'all on the spot, so there's no pressure at all, but it's an invitation. And if something feels like it's resonating or you wanna share something, that I want to also hold you in this space together. So we're starting off, as I said, with a duality of better and worse. So the first thing would be, what are the worst colonial and supremacist things you've ever witnessed in university that have yet to change? And again, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so share what you feel is comfortable for you. The idea is to understand the spectrum. As much as we talk about what needs to be done, it needs to be rooted in understanding of what has not been activated or what has been activated in problematic and also harmful ways, right? So that we can deny the worst as we are seeking the best. So that's why I want to have this full-fledged picture, but also where you're coming from. What have you experienced? Or what are things that you're keenly aware of that you seek to eradicate in your practice and in your activism and your presence? So I'm gonna give y'all a minute to think it through. And if for some reasons you're not able to submit your answers online, just share in the chat. Or if you're comfortable, you can on mic. And if not, live here, we can have that conversation. And as we move forward, I think we're all gonna warm up a little bit more to each other in this space. And so we're gonna be more spontaneous in our exchanges, but I'll give you a minute or two just to ponder the first one. And as you can anticipate, the follow-up prompt is gonna be the reverse imagery of what is the most beautiful, brilliant thing that you've seen or that you want to see in our institutions when it comes to decolonial education. So just gonna give you a minute. And as I said, I invite you to risk a little bit of emotional vulnerability in the sense that if there's something that lies dormant at the core of your experience and that nobody gets to be privy to in such spaces, chances are that our ability to transform that is going to be very mitigated because we're not going to know exactly how deep it goes or how systemic it's been for you. So again, there are ways that you can word this to make sure that you're not oversharing, but there is value in a contribution that speaks to a very private emotional moment, because those are things sometimes that are so nuanced that in a lot of strategies or trainings, they get overlooked. And there's a strong emotional core to, trauma and oppression. So any way that we can address that without putting people on the spot, it's a beautiful way to empower everyone. And usually the first act of vulnerability sets everybody else free. Because, the way that we self-generate the healing that we want, it starts with us. And then everybody else kind of feel like they have a load taken off their shoulders, and now we can get to a real level of depth together. So just wanted to put that out there, but there are many things that can come to mind. But yeah, I don't know if any of you feels comfortable and there's no pressure sharing a couple of your thoughts as well.
My name is Amanda Schwanemesh, and I'm an MA student in the individualized program. And yeah, I've had many experiences of this, and I can remember, well, I'll bring it up because it was pretty bad. And well, I'm Indigenous, so, and I had a professor once, like it was in education and First Peoples, and it just was, there was how can I say that, it was like a lack of sympathy, empathy, and that, intergenerational trauma, things like that, and from the residential school, because that was the main topic. There was the thinking of that we should be over it now.
Yeah.
So, and my dad was in residential school too, and like it's something you cannot just get over, So that was a pretty bad one, and yeah, so.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think you can leave it on. Yeah, just in case. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to see if we have folks online, adding to this, but as you said, like this narrative of get over it. And the irony in all of it is like the real history has not been institutionalized, at least not to privileged, people. And so I love putting on the spotlight, humans like Tam Kaha and other folks who are amazing researchers and actually help us uncover the truth, because it changes the narratives if what I'm talking about is one generation ago. Changes the narrative if I'm talking about this ongoing generation as well, right? And when you as a people have a status of non-human that is imprinted in the fabric of how people, relate to you, undoing that will take more than one generation, right? So it's also this thing that even if legally there may or may not be a recognition of harm or history, it does not undo the ideological programming of the humans that one generation ago are still very much embedded in the fabric of how we move as a society. There are decision makers or stakeholders, right? And so until we're not able to decolonize our minds, we can call our legal institutions all types of things, but then the harm is legitimate in their psyches because we still haven't shifted in a non-legal way from non-humans to humans, right? So as you said, there are a lot of textures to that, right? There's the emotional, but there's also the reality that the historical narratives are not scientific, right? Like fact is fact. And there's this propensity to use emotions to try to delegitimize our stories, to say that we're only emotional, whatever that means. But when you look at the scientific facts in the face, they don't care about how I feel about history. So is history something that is framed by privilege? Or is it something that is truly self-standing and has its own scientific probity and merit? So that's also something to investigate, right? But thank you very much for sharing that. I think, was that a comment in the chat? No? Okay. I think maybe it's one of the teams, but I think we can move on to the next slide. And you can just press the other arrow, cool. So what are the most amazing decolonial things you wish university would do, but are told are too, quote unquote, ambitious, costly, unrealistic, or impossible? I'm using this language because I've noticed when we propose a shift in the status quo, it's inconvenient to be efficient, right? And a lot of what is efficient, it's actual operational convenience as opposed to operational consistency. We've been doing the wrong thing for a long time, so we're really good at it. And the solution is very disruptive, but if disruption proposes the ultimate best efficient alternative, I'll much rather be inconvenienced and my privilege for a minute to be able to achieve that. So sometimes the vocabulary of ambitious, it was used a lot to tame my ideas in my classrooms, like stay in your lane, right? That was kind of the subtext of that. So I'm wondering if for any of y'all, there are things that you've had in your hearts of hearts that you would love to see, but then the scale of what's possible feels too big in comparison to what you actually want to do. And I want that to be part of an anchor to our conversation, because if we put a ceiling on, what needs to happen, then we tend to be very repetitive of the existing system because we're afraid of, it began using those vocabulary of like being too unrealistic and things of that nature. So today I would love to start with the end in mind. If we had carte blanche, if we could do whatever, if nothing was off the table, what would your educational experience need to look like for it to be maximally decolonial in a way that's healing? Because I feel too often we're tamed into practicality, and that's a very controlling, hyper-capitalistic methodology to kind of derail of before we actually got something in place, right? We don't have the budget for this, we don't have the capacity. So if you had this magic wand and your dream of a decolonial institution could be implemented, what would it look like? So I'll give you all a couple, seconds to think it through. And as I said, there are no bad answers, but I want to change the script of trying to think so much like the system that even our ability to dream is very small and very contained, because we're looking at the scale of realistic as opposed to what is needed, and they don't speak the same language of change. I know that in a couple minutes, I will share with you my version of a lot of those things so that you have more context, but I love to start with you, right? And sometimes when we are able or unable in the moment to answer for different reasons, that's also part of the answer. So it could be that maybe we've been so consumed with, minute problem solving that we lost a perspective of, a systemic ideal that transcends like the day-to-day or the relief or the reactive work, right? So there's something to be said about that. But yeah, so just give you a minute, and whenever and if ever you're comfortable, feel free to share. And as I said, after I go through the framework, I think is going to be a bit more generative, because then you're going to feel like, okay, I have clarity, I have context, I have examples. But for now, as I said, I wanted to be open for you. So what feels right?
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm the Indigenous coordinator for Indigenous community engagement here at the university in the Office of Community Engagement.
Yeah.
I'm new to the university, so my background is not in this institution, but in Cree entities. But I don't have an example to give, but I just wanted to say, the idea of systematic change and the idea of change in general is often shunned, right? It's often like people don't like change. So what I would like to see is the embracing of and the openness of change, right? Just at a basic level. And so, yes, we can say examples and everything and wish, but I don't think if you don't have that openness, then, it's all mute. So I think and I'm sometimes simplistic in the way I think, because I think basic sometimes need the foundation, right, of things need to shift, need to change. So my answer is the embracing of change, of that, the one constant in life, right, is change. I think that's Einstein. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as you said, change, even beyond our conversation, is a very potential field energy for a lot of humans, especially the ones that benefit from hierarchy or just define stability with status or status quo, right? So change management in and of itself in organization is a big thing. It's very difficult to enforce, not because it's impossible, but I feel it's like good ideas, but wrong implementation, right? And the way that I like to function typically is to reverse engineer my processes. So have the keenest sense of what are the limitations structurally and what are the biggest, wildest possible things that can happen. And then, as you said, once I have that vision, is I'm going to reverse engineer from then and look with what I call basic solution, but not basic impact. How can we make this simple, but with depth, right? But even that level of simplicity is still change. And because of that, there's always friction. And my dad has one of these quotes. He loves these quotes. He's a very philosophical human, and I'll translate, but in French, it's même le changement le plus désiré n'est pas sans friction. Right? So even the most sought after of changes is not without its own, form of friction. So even though I wanted it, it still irks me to have to change and adapt to be able to attain that very thing. All the more so when we're talking about, decoloniality, decolonization. A lot of people have certain ideological definitions that make it very convenient to be alienated from the space, because all they hear is removal of privilege as opposed to inclusivity for all. And that's why in my approaches too, the more I can understand the reluctance of people that are needed, the more we can adapt how we get them involved, as opposed to bandying something that sounds really good, but it's also more triggering than it is transformational, right? So in a minute, we're gonna get around to that, but yes, thank you for sharing that, because that's just the reality of the work, right? I was looking over there to see, I think we have somebody, Brett, thank you. So you're saying provide education for free, creating classrooms that are more reciprocal and less based on an expert hierarchical model, changing grading systems to be more relevant to the learning of students. Amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And as you said, even with the grading system, there's not per se a correlation with necessarily higher quality education and the grading that I receive. Right, I know a lot of crammers and a lot of people who just know how to navigate the system, but insofar as truly implementing knowledge per se, there's not a direct correlation, but it's so ingrained that it's not particularly called into question, right? So as you said, if the outcome is truly knowledge acquisition, then how we get there or how we evaluate that is also allowed to be fluid. And then, as you said, having classrooms that are more horizontal as another dynamics as well, and then providing free education. So thank you so much. That's lovely. So I think we can get ready and jump back into the slides. That will be the last prompt. And then, as I said, I will take about 5 to 10 or ish minutes, and I will walk you through my frameworks with example and different things, just so that we can kick off the conversation and then bring it back to you. Based on your work, your aspirations, how do you want to feel empowered? What tools specifically do you need? And I want to be able to facilitate that for you. So in order to get there, just asking this little prompt of what would make this an amazing workshop / experience for you? That would just take your breath away. What do you want to learn? What do you want to feel? What do you want to create? And what do you want to experience? So again, I'll give you a couple seconds to ponder this through. And the ultimate aim is, when you leave, I want you to be able to leave with that experience.
Well, part of my work right now is I'm working on a decolonial toolbox that is essentially a reading list, honestly. I was given this project, which is, I am embracing the project, but also, so it was your title of your workshop that I was like, like intriguing. Like I'm like, yeah, if we could push the boundary a little bit more. I mean, it's a reading list of like different podcasts, videos, like there's links, it's not just scholarly articles. It's so in a sense there's multimedia, but can we push it a bit further?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's what I'd like to know.
Awesome. Thank you. That's amazing. Great. Even off the top of my, you wanted to go? Go ahead. Oh yeah, please go ahead. I'll go after.
I think, what Cynthia was saying is putting it in action, and also with my my MA, I really don't know how how it will be impactful and things like that, because I'm doing it differently, the research, and so I think that would be one thing. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I will kick around a couple ideas, just leveraging what you said, and maybe that will give context to also the other people joining us online, and maybe they will get to a place of contributing as well. But as we were talking about your MA, I'm in the same scenario, right? I decided to do an MA where I would do a thesis as opposed to the course base because I didn't want to be put in a position where I'm just going to have a lot of systemic whitewashing of history and knowledge. And I wanted to enforce a different narrative that was actually a gap in scholarship. In my case, my background is African Indigenous, and a lot of people don't know that Haitian Creole is an African Indigenous language. We've had multiple genocides of our peoples with an S. And so for me, it's resurrecting again the African indigeneity of my people that even us are not properly educated about because of systemic and internalized oppression as well, right? So I wanted to do a couple of things different. I wanted to create what was missing. I didn't want to submit to like white supremacy culture and education and have to buy down to the same scholars. So yes, there's a part of my reading list, my citations and all of that. I also chose my people speak oral languages. So I'm introducing a methodology on how to translate oral languages, and what I wanted to do was, to your point of how is that impactful, I chose to use accessible language so that even if you're not at an MA level, you can still understand 99% of my message so that I can use my research to empower real organizations on the ground, as opposed to having less than 2% of the academy ever reading my stuff. The other thing was I made it a practical methodology so that it's basically a step-by-step recipe so that if I'm a prof or a student, I can utilize the work that I'm putting together and that can become a tool in their classroom, as opposed to a theory of decolonization, where in my field, let's say in languages, you still don't know how to translate African/Indigenous languages. You love the theory of it, but then we can impact the profession as a field because people don't have tangible tools. So that was a way for me to situate myself different. Also, all my scholars and references are people that typically don't fit the canon. So there are people that are underground as well. And I'm also supporting other African and Indigenous scholars and organizations. So I put them, on the stage in that sense. So for me, it was also very healing to bring that missing knowledge to my community, to my people, and also to make it intergenerational, because it's my generation who has the privilege and access in many regards that I know my parents and my foreparents have fought for. So it's like this holistic coming together. And for me, I'm utilizing university resources to actually empower my community, right? So I wanted to share this with you just in case it resonates, and I will be happy to talk more if you want about this. So it's in progress. Like my supervisor, if he's watching this, I know he's busy, but he's reviewing it, but just to give people tools, right? So how, to the point of what Brett was saying, for me, it's also a way to acquire power in the classroom as a multiple minority, because now I'm the one who's divesting information, and I'm the one who's looked to as an expert or as a knowledge, a detainee of knowledge or a creator of knowledge. And I'm changing the narrative. So being the change that we want to see in the world kind of thing, right? And to the point of what you were saying as well, Cynthia, about the decolonial toolbox, and those are just things off the cuff that are occurring to me, but I created this methodology in my work where whenever I read something, I need to act on it. I'm not allowed to read another resource until my life reflects the knowledge that I just acquired. So let's say you have that decolonial, toolkit, and you have those books. What are kind of actions that people can take up based on their roles, so that we honor their capacity, but they're not allowed, quote unquote, or empowered to move forward, because or else we become consumeristic in our knowledge base. And we're like those very fact decolonial intellectuals, but then our work does not mimic the reality of what we know. And also it forces us to go deeper and simpler and to do more with less. So it's not about the quantity of books, right? It's about the depth. And when I look at your life, I should know you've read this book. That could be a new standard that we're setting, to also have this, instead of having this slow, this fast food reading mentality, it's like this slow food reading. I'm gonna take my time. And it could be that I'm thinking like Shift, has a co-working space. It could be that we're hosting circles where folks are coming together and we're facilitating sessions for them to have the toolkit. and we're reading that one book, and every time we go deeper with people's implementation of the knowledges, right? So for me, like, there are many ways that we can play with this. I always look to the missing pieces: implementation. As we say, ideation without execution is moot, right? So how do we kind of bypass that? And those can be things that we can help. And I feel people need context. So is there a video that we can have? Is there a vlog that we could do, like a vlog series? Is there a challenge that we could do? We're reading this together. We have a Facebook community or whatever, and we're all in this together, but in action, right? So those are ideas that can be, passed around as well. Or even in that list, as you mentioned, multimedia, but also different languages. So for me, it's very humbling, to be in spaces where my language isn't dominant. So how can we play with that disruption? So anyways, just some ideas and things to consider. How can we can push this? And something that recently was brought to my attention is the best way to innovate is to listen to the people who hate the work that we do, because they tell us a lot of systemic gaps that our community is just preaching to the choir about. So they can tell us practically, and those becomes blue oceans or opportunity to innovate. And from then we can stabilize something that's even bigger and greater, and it's gonna have wider appeal and reach and visibility. So that can also be something. So even folks that we know that don't do reading clubs or that don't like toolkits or whatever, ask them why. And off of that, we can generate something that can help us a lot grow in our own practices. Yeah. So just some food for thought, and we'll keep on expanding, but thank you for your shares. Awesome. So I mentioned in the slides that, this would be the part where it's more about the framework. Awesome. So this is looking at the real metrics. One of the things that I've noticed is even when we have quote unquote better quality education, we don't necessarily have better outcomes professionally. So me having a PhD in a certain field or master's, typically there can even be a correlation where I'm making less money, right? So somebody, and I've seen this in different jobs, lower level education, but higher prospects. So how do we mitigate these gaps? Because when we look at marginalized, disenfranchised students, they're going to school having heavier debt, right? And then they're coming into a space where they're not in a position to create wealth at a multi-directional scale. So they just have a little bit more privilege enough to afford to survive tomorrow, but not enough to have stability and sustainability financially for and with their people, right? So one of the biggest gap in those conversations is the economics of power. We intellectualize a lot of privilege, but we don't make it something that is transformational. Because if I know better, how come I don't get to live better? When I'm competing on the market with the education and knowledge base that I have, I'm an intellectual activist, but I'm not professionally all the better for it. And so money in that sense affords you the privilege to be free, because now I have true quality of choice. I don't have to pick this to survive. I don't have this struggle mentality, and survivorship is not the ceiling or the floor of my development as a human, and the repercussions of that across generations, right? So when I look at, let's say, education per se, what are the lowest paid studies or professions? And who do they tend to target? What are the lowest earning demographics off of school? And then when we look at the dropout rates, that's something that we look at as well. But do we look at the non-graduates, people that don't even make it there, people that are just not even an option for the system, right? So our ability to create a new market of empowerment for a new generation of students that multi-generationally were denied to education in and of itself as an institution, that's one thing. But then when we look at debt as well, and then we look at what are the cheapest education and what is the most expensive one, and who gets to be overrepresented in those two areas. Also, where do we have the more and the least numbers of disenfranchised people and minorities, right? We will notice the correlation I'm making, it's about money. Because we often omit that as activists. It's not noble to factor that in, but it's your currency to be able to have sustainability in anything that you do. Or else you're financially codependent on external bodies and institutions to wait for a timeline what is politically convenient for them to look at you as trendy. That's the setup that we're in. Whereas when I have wealth at a multi-generational scale, I'm able to heal and sustain this, but also I'm able to self-generate the things that I need as a people, right? And so when we think of power dynamics, I don't have to bargain anything. I don't have to compromise myself or betray myself to access better quality anything, be it education or profession. So the most pernicious thing that is systemically overlooked is the economics of privilege, right? I can have a PhD in sociology and what have you. How does that correlate to my ability to impact? And how is that sustained if I don't have the means materially to empower anyone? If the biggest gift I have is knowledge without material privilege, I'm just part of the cycle in different level, and I'm not understanding how my power is purely intellectual privilege. It's not transformational as such, right? So when we move on over to the next slide, as I said, I'm all about solutions. And so looking at when we know better, how do we do better? It's one thing to have that understanding, but then how does that reframe our approach to education as students, as profs, et cetera? So I have put those pillars. The numbers are a bit arbitrary just so that it could fit on the slide. And as I said, you will have access to these. But when we look at pillar number 1, I'm very keen on multidirectional wealth and healing. As I said, it affords you the right to be free, and it makes it so that your community is untouchable. So no matter what, we have enough wherewithal to be able to contend with other powers, where we're not put in a place where we have to only to betray ourselves through survivorship only. The second thing too is, and I'm quoting this beautiful woman, Conchabwika, and she talked about how they're asking her as this Black, woman in our industry that's very male-dominated, how did she make it? And she said she lives her lives in such a way that she only makes it hard for a man to live in a man's world, right? So when you think of minorities, as I say, us minorities, the reality is the cost to privilege is to colonize yourself into power. I have to look white, I have to sound white, I have to change a lot of things. So there's whitewashing, selling out, masking, performance. So when we look at the individual success stories of people who make it in our communities, they're typically people that would be the furthest removed from a lot of traditional values. Or at the very least, they have to hibernate those values so that they can look like privilege and now they can make it. So when we look at real metrics of success or decolonial power, it's my ability to own privilege is not proportionate to me having to betray myself, my people, or colonize any part of who I am into acceptance, right? And that's not something that is necessarily quantified or qualified a lot in the work that we do in that sense, right? So for example, what are the accents of privilege? When I speak French, I speak English, I speak those colonial languages, we don't talk about that. How it plays out in a classroom, how it's read as me being more intelligent or professional in different milieus, right? So how do we make it so that for most disenfranchised peoples, betrayal is not the way that they can go from survivorship to privilege? And number 3 is when we are, let's say in those relief programs, the standard of success is you're coping, you're settling, or you're surviving a bit better, but it's never about, you actually get to choose the wildest thing that you want. If you want to be an astronaut, that's an option. We're really conditioned to settle into those small positions, those small, like you should be happy, you're better off than you were before, and it's never about thriving. It would be offensive in those programs to say, I want to be a multimillionaire, but it would be acceptable to say, yeah, I just want to have that low paying job, and we're going to call that a success for the community, right? So those are the types of ceilings that we do encounter a lot. And then number 4, which is an extension of that, is what I call professional ghettos. So it's jobs where, let's say the white dominant community doesn't want to work. Now we have those in-demand programs, and we call that diversity and inclusion. We don't have a real quality of choice. Is that what people want to do in their hearts of hearts? Do we even have the ability to dream? Is dreaming too much to ask in a world that is being pragmatic about equality, right? And I'm looking at what I call career segregation. So I get into a job, but I'm plateaued real quick. My glass ceiling is the floor of somebody else, right? And then I'm supposed to be content because, hey, that's more than your people used to have. You're too ambitious, you're getting greedy. And when we are in positions of leadership or power, we're typically tokens. So do I have true leadership authority? Do I have the discretionary power of saying yes or no? Can I veto something? So our ability to have true power in that sense, that's a metric of decolonial change. And the last one is, that was my friend Sandra was saying this at an event, and she said, I want the ability to be as bad as a person that has the most privilege. We have the standard of, let's say, Black excellence as a reference. So again, we always need to be overqualified to dare desire the minimum. whereas the people with the most privilege in the room get to be extremely mediocre, and that's labeled as competence. So in a world where decolonization is true and how power structure works, I get the privilege of being as mediocre as the next person and be rewarded accordingly as they would, as opposed to always have to strive towards excellence. So the spectrum of mediocrity to excellence is truly equalized. And also the last part to this is, as I said, we don't have the ability to dream. We have to be pragmatic. Is that realistic? Based on where you come from and what you do, you should actually do that. Who gets to dream in this world? Who has the privilege, the systemic privilege to dream? Who has the privilege to even see themselves as a wealth creators? So those are like the pillars that I put together. And as you can see, it goes beyond higher education. But the idea is that education is supposed to prepare us for a job, supposed to prepare us for the job market. So when we're not correlating those dots, what are we doing? Are we incubating intellectual privilege that is disconnected from reality? So when I come out of my classes, how am I able to contend with those pillars? Am I even thinking about that? Or is it a shock to me? Do I get whiplash once I'm thrown on the job market that now I'm settling into those jobs? I don't have a lot of aspirations. I don't know how to market my value. I don't think of it. I have to make myself very small. I have to look like what privilege to be able to attain leadership. And when I do, it's very controlled leadership, as opposed to what my privileged counterparts may experience, right? So those are things that if we don't think in reverse, as is to say, what is the point of education? We're empowering humans to be able to contend for themselves professionally. How are we setting them up for that success, right? So then the next slide is me providing some examples as well. So that was what I call like the real metrics. So there's so many more that I could share. It was really hard for me to break it down, and I wanted them to be varied so that you could have a sense of, if you are in science, if you're in STEM, if you're in languages or communications, you can see a little bit of yourself in that. Some of them are folks I know, but for the most part, I would say like my tribe of mentors. So there's Swati, really love her to pieces. And so we were talking about it, for years ago, but she specialized in this field. So she decolonizes the field of West medicine. So what she does is this rematriation of, indigenous practices that have been co-opted by the West scientific industry. And now she, does a proper research and make sure that credit goes where it's supposed to go, but she also reframes the way that people think about medicine. So thinking that a lot of things started with certain, whitewashing traditions where that's not the true lineage, and also helping people. She works a lot with integrative, health. So again, that holism. So this is a very practical way that being imbued as a decolonial scientist empowers you to, in our case, create a new market. So that's a connection that we don't see. A lot of decolonization conversation don't correlate to our ability to live better lives, as in on a material and economic level. It is not because that connection isn't there, it's because activists are not trained to understand wealth generation, and the wealth generators of this world are not trained to be activists. So we have that chasm that comes from capitalism and oppression, but not from a structural impossibility. So those are the kind of things that I love to research in my work and in my business as well, because I see the gap and I see how it's costing us the ability to be sustainable. So you can see here, if you're a decolonial scientist and pharmacology, you can create that industry and empower people with integrity and empower them to reconnect with their bodies, their lands, their knowledge system, but also, with their own field. So yes, Nadine, I will share all of this with you so that you can support those beautiful humans, but I also want you to be excited by them. So yes, thank you for sharing this in the chat. Pas un problème. No problem. And then there's Amina. Amina, what she does, amazing human being. So is a sex doula, is also a Black person, sexological body worker, and does secret sex work. And there are many other things. So here's a way where when you decolonize the body, you decolonize and depathologize sexuality, you become a healer through different practices that integrate a lot of different Pan-Afro and indigenous traditions, right? So again, your ability to bring decolonization to a field of industry empowers you to be a leader of change, but also to be able to monetize your ability to impact so that now you don't have to survive, and you can be one of the pivots in your community that helps, us tap into multi-generational wealth and healing, right? So instead of pandering to established problematic colonial institutions, we can bridge a lot of gaps and help people come with us into the space where we're sanitizing a lot of harm and systemic oppression that's being done. So this is in a different realm, right? So if you're in psychology and sexology as well, like those are things that you can consider. And I put the reference so that you can see a little bit more about their work, understand the science behind it. We have Dr. James, who's a Creed Two-Spirit family physician, particularly works with transgender indigenous youth, right? So again, it's like this beautiful amalgamation of intersectionality. So you have, indigeneity, you have two-spiritness, and then you have the field of medicine. And, in Dr. James' case, it's about bringing accessibility to the youth that otherwise would be extremely hard pressed to access the kind of care that only James can provide, right? And there's also the language component. So most of those people that I'm also sharing, they're multilingual. They speak their native indigenous languages and they speak other languages. And that's also how they're able to help heal different communities, but also putting their people on the map, because now they become a reference in a field that is typically white dominated. Then there's Ty. I love him to pieces. So he's first generation Haitian. And now he just exploded on social media and he has his own company and personal brand because basically, to make a long story short, there's this show, Occupation Double, right? So in French, and it's reality TV shows, but again, they don't represent diversity. You're born here, but you're invisible. So he did a parody on social media and it blew up because all the youth that are not targeted by that mainstream media went on this platform to the extent that the actual network reached out to him because now he was overshadowing their viewings with the show that he had because he represented the people that are never seen, his people. And then it blew up into him having this kind of uncle figure that everybody can relate to in the community. And now that's his career. So now he has this international platform, travels around continents. As I'm talking, he might be in France or in Guadeloupe or Martinique because he's always flying back and forth. But again, it's the gift of oftentimes in the system, we're made to believe that if you're not promoting a white culture, you don't have appeal or you don't have mainstream appeal in what you do. So you have to compromise and you have to betray yourself on some level. So for him, the very reason that he's able to do what couldn't be done in his field is because he leaned into representation for his people. And he does it through humor and stand-up comedy and other things like that. But now it puts us on the map and now we become a reference. So now people are learning, different words in Haitian Creole. Now they're seeing us in those different platforms. And it's mostly, Black and brown people that relate to his messaging. So that's one such example. So he does this work mostly in French, but also Haitian Creole and a little bit of English as well, right? So again, we all speak on average 2 languages out of survivorship. Then Hassan Minaj, I adore him. So Indian American comedian, and he did this revolutionary show that's called The Patriot Act. And I strongly invite folks to check it out. It's very powerful. And again, it's this thing that he did the thing that couldn't be done in American history as a Muslim, brown, Indian American, talking about politics, making it mainstream, but educational, and he's not whitewashing anything, right? And there are instances where he's gonna speak in his own language, and he has this base and community. We were always there, we were just never represented on those channels. So now he has his career that's elevated through that, but it's a lot of decolonization. The real hidden history of American politics is basically his bread and butter when it comes to his approach. Then there's Tam Kaha, love her a lot. So she's a founder and the lead historian of the African Indigenous Decolonial School of Language and History. And it's taught by people from the continent, from the different tribes, and they're all African Indigenous peoples, teaching about the language and the history in a non-whitewashing way, purely decolonial. So there are people out there doing it, but we're not talking about it. And I'm using them as examples because this could be careers for students. Now when I'm going into STEM, I'm thinking of somebody like Swati, I'm thinking of somebody like Amina, I'm in communications, I'm in languages, I'm thinking of somebody like Tamkaha or Tai. If I'm on poli-sci, I'm thinking of somebody like Hassan, right? So it changes the purpose of education because it's related to real world impact. If I'm going there and I'm stuffing my mind, but I'm emptying my ability to be an activist, there's not much of a point existentially to me having access to education, right? So those are examples that I'm using to help catalyze in our minds what it means to decolonize the institution. Is we need to start with the end in mind. The end is not the diploma. The end is the actual job or the career or the dream. So how are they speaking the same language? And how is the fact that I went to school a contribution to that? For a lot of us, we studied in one field and we end up working in a completely different field, right? Which is not a bad thing, but it also speaks to a disconnect, right? Why isn't it self-sufficient enough? You know, when I'm talking about my studies, that I can leverage this to produce like 90% of my career development journey, right? Also something to keep in mind. So now we can move on to the next. What was it again? Yeah, I guess even more examples. So now when we bring it back to actual education today, I talk about the outcome when I'm out the gates, I have my diplomas, whatever, but now how do we get from one point to the next? So as I said, in STEM, there are many things that can be done, but I've been part of different projects, amongst which with SEED, and we're talking about how to use low tech to help empower international development in different African indigenous villages and communities. So what if now you have classes, practicums, or international internships that you can do now, and you're developing innovative, low-tech, accessible technology to empower specific communities and peoples. And we're fostering a lot of focus on indigenous peoples and African indigenous people, or BIPOC, right? And the idea is that you have real-world impact. And when I was talking about Tamkaha, she has this amazing IG page. I recommend everybody check it out. And she promotes the hidden African indigenous history, but people that are doing revolutionary thing. So for example, she was showcasing this African indigenous scientist who is addressing the water crisis on Earth, especially for his community, and developing cheap technology where you can transform air into water. So it changes the focus of where the innovation of science lies. It's not white dominated. It's not even English dominated. And it changes the narrative that, of how we are portrayed as peoples, right? So now when the frontier, like the cutting edge of innovation doesn't look like white privilege, it changes what education portrays. And now when you look at those pioneers that exist right now, and we're in conversation with them, those can become lecturers, but they're talking about pragmatic things. So they use science to address systemic climate change and crisis by focusing on the knowledge of indigenous people. Right? So those are things that in our classes can be instituted. And as you said, as we were saying before, it's one step at a time. So it can be a basic solution, but not a basic impact. SEED, for example, here, this Fee Levy organization, they already do that. They do those international internships. Maybe it's just a matter of you get the credits for it and that's it, right? So there are many things that we're already putting into motions, but we need to know how to communicate with each other better and be more efficient. Another example is, I have this program that I'm developing, but it's a bilingual indigenous education program. And in this case, I would apply this to business school. And when you are multilingual, you speak literally the language of different markets. So if you go to HEC here, you can learn Spanish, French, and English. Why couldn't we learn an indigenous language, right? So it's like the standard of the industry is biased, but it gives the impression that our communities are not innovative enough to be relevant to the extent that now we're institutionalized as well. But it makes more sense, right? We're here. So is this thing that simple shifts, leveraging pre-existing infrastructure, and now we can have real world impact, and our education is not theory only, and it's not intellectual privilege for sake of intellectual privilege, but it's truly fostering change. And you're gonna notice that in all my examples, at the core of it, you have a language and you have culture. So that for me to be able to ascend to a better position and ability to create wealth for and by my people, I don't have to sell out. And that's the ultimate thing that we don't see a lot. When you look at the 30 under 30 list or the top CEOs in the world in different industries, yes, they may be from a community, but how much representation do we have for the traditional ancestry? Like a lot of these are like the most whitewashed version that you can get. And we don't have enough of a spectrum where I get to be me 100%. I don't have to deny my Blackness to make it to any of those lists, or I don't have to deny my people. I don't have to change my accent, my pitch, the way that I wear my clothes, or the way that I do my hair. It's all valid. So in the case of having this multilingual, school of business, where we're also implementing indigenous languages, it's looking at what new markets are we creating. And the list of, indigenous businesses is astonishing. But again, when we're not normalizing this into an environment like business, it's very easy to keep on propagating the harmful and racist, stereotypes. So again, we're already here. I see Merle, thank you so much for this. Oh, thank you, Merle. It was really lovely to have you here. And I'm just gonna go through real quick through the last two examples, and then we can bring it back to y'all, because that's a point, but, oh no, you were good. The slide before, thank you. So the other one is, again, when I was talking about Hassan, is you're looking at a highly profitable streaming only show. So if I'm studying media and communications, now my example can be Hassan. Maybe I can look to have an internship with someone like that, right? Or I can look to create my own version of this here. Or when we're looking at media companies, we can have BIPOC media companies that center our peoples, our language, our identities. And I'm referencing here Issa Rae. So she created her own media company, Horse Media. She started off of YouTube. And what she did, she called the series Awkward Black Girl. And that's what it was. So the life and, an awkward Black woman, but it was beautiful because you never see dark-skinned woman portrayed as lead when it's not a slavery or it's not about abuse or, over-sexualization. And so she was this nuanced, multicultural, modern woman who was navigating a very white supremacist environment with humor. So it was very nuanced, very unique, and no, typical network channel would have picked it up. So she created her own platform, and now what they do so many things. They have those kind of like festivals where we have different BIPOC, artists and filmmakers that are pitching their movies so that they can be seen. And so she created a space where now at a multi-generational scale, we can all achieve representation like that. And it's for us and by us. So again, when that's the standard of what education can look like, those people can become lecturers. Those people can become case studies. Those people can become scholars. Those people can be opportunities for us to have interns. So again, the potential is fierce. And last but not least, as I was talking about mentioning with Seed, for example, so shout out to Samita Khadija. I know Khadija was watching today. So as I said, I studied also in languages. And we have here, we have indigenous directions, and we have different indigenous languages, but they're separated from Mandarin languages that I can learn here. And I'm wondering why. Why couldn't it be that when I'm going into, the Department of Languages here, I can see all those indigenous languages at the same level? And I don't need to, what I'm saying? So even if maybe when I'm logging in, I'm enrolling, yes, I'm gonna be under another umbrella, but for sake of more representation, more accessibility, and a change in the institution, like to have the languages properly represented there. And so as I said, even with HSC, right, if I can learn Spanish, I don't see why Spanish would be more relevant than an indigenous language that is native to the lands that I benefit from, right? So again, it's all of those things that we can cook and bake into the curriculum. And as much as we have international trips and development, what can we have more land-based pedagogy as well offered to the students, as appropriate, of course. And then last but not least, this is a link. So when it's underlined like this, it's typically a link. So this is a shout out to my soul sister, Lena, but she creates this business to empower language educators and coaches to be able to live thriving life through holistic business strategies. So typically when you learn languages, you either gonna work for the UN, that's the higher people are gonna think of, your translator, you're an interpreter, or your prof, your tutor, that's it. There's so many things you can do with languages, and none of the examples that I mentioned empower you to necessarily be sustainable financially, right? So again, this expectation that you're gonna struggle, you're gonna cope, you're gonna settle, but hey, that's okay, that's a standard for your work. So when we aim better and we do better, we're able to have any one of these opportunities and make it something that is sustainable enough that we can use it to empower our peoples and our community at a multi-generational scale. And we don't have to be on the struggle bus, as they say, or to only be in survivorship mode in and out. So that was for this part. And yeah, and then I guess we can move on to the next slide. Oh, you have to go, don't feel bad. It's so good. It's so good. It was really lovely to see you. Yeah, thank you for being here. It's okay. Thank you. There you go. Perfect. So yeah. So that was just like the summary. as I was saying, of like my framework, and this is the part where I want to kick it to you. As I said, I put those little prompts, but you're not beholden to them. It's just to help you kind of figure out how you may want to frame your answers. But from everything that I said, there are basically three parts that I wanted you to be able to think of. One is education. So if you're watching this today, you're curious about how we can use a decolonial university/education, right? Beyond workshops and beyond a reading list to truly have impact. And I'm talking world impact. So I would love for you to think about one specific class or course that either you're in, either you're teaching or you're learning from, and to try to use it as an example of how everything we talked about can correlate. So maybe as I was going through examples, you felt like, oh my goodness, I love this prof. I feel that, they might be open to, I don't know, teaming up with Seed and, offering credits up for international development trips or internships or whatever the case may be. But I want you to think about your lowest hanging fruit. Of all the things that we discussed, what would be the one class or program that you feel would be a good fit for you to be able to catalyze change in the way that we've been discussing it today? The second thing is, as you noticed, in all the examples I've given, language and culture is at the core of it, and especially decolonial and anti-colonial language and culture, right? So I talk a lot about indigeneity, African indigeneity as well, and BIPOCness, right? So when you think of where you come from, or a culture or a language that you want to be an ally to, how is it that in that decolonial inclusive education/university model, that specific culture/language is properly centered and not as an optional implement, but as something that drives how education functions? And last but not least, I was sharing with you like the metrics of decolonial change and success, right? And so this is kind of the highlights of it. So freedom, right? So having enough material privilege that I can actually afford to be free. Choice, the choices that I have are not just to survive or not survive. Dream making is I have the audacity to want something that seems quote unquote impossible, unrealistic, too ambitious. So, and then wealth, as I mentioned, talking about multi-generational wealth. And the last one is healing. So when you look at the true metrics of decolonial change in and out of our institution through education, those are the 5 metrics that should drive the conversation we're having, right? And also, as I was talking about freedom as in when, let's say I do have power, it's not power that I had to earn through the colonization of myself. I didn't have to become my most whitewashed version for me to have the highest level of privilege, right? I could own my truth, be proud of my people, of my culture, of my ancestors, and not have to mitigate any of that for me to be able to ascend to the highest rank of that fabricated hierarchy of privilege, right? So anyway, those are kind of the highlights of what you might want to think about. And as I said, the idea is to start a conversation. So I don't know how many folks we have still online, but if ever y'all want to pitch in on mic, turn on the video, or just interact in the chat, like the time is now. Because as I said, the whole point is for you to leave here with something concrete, right? So as much as this has been really great, if you go back to your same old, you go back to your day job or you go back to your studies and you're still not able to see how you can generate change, we missed the point of today's space. So I wanted to be practical, and that's why the more you share, the more we're able to co-create. So as I said, now I want to get back to you. So what is something that you want to see happen, and maybe you're not really sure on how to make it happen, and then we can have that conversation, right? So feel free to unmute, share in the chat, comment, and just have a conversation from there. So I will give you a minute, and then we'll see. And I don't know how many people we have online. It feels like we have 4-ish. Yeah. Oh, okay, that's good. So if you want to turn on your cameras, now would be a good time. We have about 20-ish minutes. Oh, thank you, Nadzin. So I want to see an Association of Black Graduate Students in the Arts and Humanities at Concordia. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Oh, Khadija, hey. That's lovely. As maybe your answers trickle in, I'm just going to circle back to Nazin real quick. So I was going to say, Nazin, I don't know if you've heard of, the Black Student Union, BSU. You can check them out on Instagram if you want. That's where they're typically active. And I would say, yeah, okay, cool. And I would say work with people that are already part of the change you want to see, and then you can pitch this to them and you can have conversations and talk about what's possible. Chances are that they're already thinking of that. So you said you have a full director of all Black University Student Associations in Canada. Amazing. And so what do you think is missing? It feels like you have some level of research. Now, I don't know if you are personally connected to those people, but I would say the next step is to, again, look to the lowest hanging fruit. You were specific in how you reference Concordia University. So I would potentially start there. So you're saying, I'm already in contact with one person who wants to start a Quebec chapter, National Black Graduate Network here. Amazing. So it feels like you're doing the work. Tell me, how could I help you today? If you had something that you weren't clear about, or you're hesitant about, or somewhere where you feel stuck, spread the word. Awesome. So if you want to spread the word, I do have a couple ideas for you. I would say that we're privileged in a way at Concordia where we have a lot of social transformation work that has been vindicated by the institution, right? So always on the lookout for co-conspirators, I got you. So for example, have you thought of, the newspapers, the student newspapers and other newspapers? So for example, if you got friends or you got people in your network that specialize in journalism, which is another word for PR, you could, be able to then share with them the background story of the project that you want to highlight, and they will be able to package it in a way where now it could be distributed across their own information network, right? You're a comms and outreach specialist. Excellent. The other day I was at CJLO. We were having the best of times, and we had this soulful conversation. We were really candid. I didn't expect it to get that real. I loved it. And we were really real about Black mental health, and we went in all different types of direction. So I'm saying that even radios can be an outlet for you. And CGLO, to my knowledge, you don't need to pay for anything. And it was the most amazing experience I've had. Their offices are lovely. Their staff is even lovelier. So I'm thinking diversify. You could have a checklist of folks that can be your co-conspirators, and they can help implement, and you just help coordinate. So as I said, we have lots of local, exactly, yes. So you're Concordia based, and it's a student radio. And then the idea is that I would encourage you also just to have conversations with them to understand how well connected they are to other networks, because what you want is a media amplification strategy. You want to know, with the least amount of effort on your part, how can you maximize the reach of the work that you're doing and enforce more systemic dissemination of it? So you said you reach out to them. Okay, great. Okay, but you know what? My coaches talk about being pleasantly persistent. So sometimes it's just, was it the best channel of communications for them? Sometimes it's a matter of timing. Do I know who you should speak to there? I was connected to them through an intermediary, but what I could do is after we're off camera and everything, I can just look it up and I can put you guys in contact with each other. So I can stay in touch with Anna and Doug from the fourth space to make sure that I can pass that information around to you. So awesome. So as they say, ask and you shall receive, because I want us to be in the implementation and the execution. Like, it's good to feel better and illuminated, but it needs to translate in how we function and activate ourselves in the world. So I'm really glad to see that. And you are already a communications specialist. I'm wondering, have you thought of amplifying your media outreach through your languages? So, there's French, there's English, but I'm wondering about other languages as well, potentially, especially if you want to reach Black students. There's a lot of us that are immigrant-born, first-generation diaspora. So what would be like the top linguistic demographics that you want to hit to make sure that we all hear about your message, right? So that's also something to think of. But yes, thank you very much, Nazin, for your input. And I want to leave the space open in case we have other folks who feel courageous enough to be seen. Yeah, okay, so not yet. We'll see once there's a nucleus, and as grad students, so English, French should be fine. Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. And Nadine, if you wanted to add something else, if there's anything else I can help you with, but I feel this could be a good starting point. And I would say too, out of all the people that you're connected to, oh, your translator, me too. We have the same languages. I also do Italian. Yeah, this morning I was interpreting for a collective. That's awesome. Cool. Well, let me know if anything comes to mind that you want to share or you want more support with. But I was just gonna say there's an exercise that I've been doing. So my coaches recommended it, and yeah, you're building a database for colleagues for referrals. Okay. So I was thinking what could be great is they call it the 20 contact list. So it's the top 20 contacts. Yes, I will. I will send you my contacts. So it's the top 20 contacts, and basically those are people that can be great connectors. So, and the idea is like through this person, how many other networks can you hit? I think sometimes we're a bit too granular and we expect like that one-on-one referral, but maybe it could be more serviceful to look at it at a wider level. So you could ask how many groups, how many networks, how many organizations, how many institutions, how many communities you're affiliated with. And that changes your ability to truly amplify your reach. Because I think sometimes the nature of a question when we're asking for referrals keeps the scope very, very, very small. And then you have to replicate the same efforts across to another contact. Whereas maybe by calibrating a little bit more strategically with that one person, you could have access maybe to 10, 20 different organizations, which for you would serve you at a higher level. But okay, you say you have this database, okay, different people in affiliations. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful to you to connect with somebody whose expertise is maybe like database management, so that you can kind of outsource that kind of very, tedious, perfect work, because it can be very labor intensive. And if you specialize in communication, that might not be the best way to leverage your gift set. But lovely. Wow. Okay, you got this. It feels like you got this, and you just need a little bit of an extra push when it comes to, as you said, disseminating the work that you do. But I think speaking with BSU and other groups like this that have a foot in the door will help you get a greater sense of how to create more, institutional energy and visibility around your work. Lovely. Okay. But as you said, we will keep the conversation going offline for sure. I'll endeavor to send you the information about my CGLO contact person. That was really lovely. And also for me, just to keep in touch with you in general. But yeah, okay. So we have about 12 minutes to go. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So as I said, the time is now. So are you brave enough to be seen, is my question to y'all. And again, no pressure, but an invitation. If you feel comfortable enough or able to turn on your video, talk a little bit about what resonated, what do you still have questions about, how I can support you, or if something isn't clear, I would say just, the floor is yours. Or if not, you can always use a chat too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to hear maybe your takeaways. That could be a way to kind of get the temperature of what resonated and what didn't, or what you would love for me to expand a little bit more about. Thank you, Nazin. That's very sweet. Yeah, I wanted it to be honestly a conversation and keep the focus on you. So as much as it's great to have references and frameworks and examples, sometimes it means that our imagination is going to mimic what we see. And that can be, a limitation in and of itself. But I'm glad it resonated. And as I said, you're all going to have access to the slides so that you can review these. And, if you want to reach out, we can connect for sure. Yeah, and you said you found out about the workshop through Concordia event page, try to get the word out. Thank you very much. That's lovely. Yeah. Great. So yeah, so as I was saying, what are your takeaways? I think you posted it at the Black Concordia Facebook group. Thank you very much, Nadzin. Yeah. And I was just thinking, there will be definitely more events to come. And so I know you're all about comms, so how to disseminate that also can be something that can be worked out. But yeah, I really appreciate your co-conspiracy with me. That's really cool. And if not, I'm curious in terms of would have been best if there were targeted outreach to student groups working on decoloniality. That's true. Yeah, that's true. But what I think is great is it being online and us having the recording is a great way to catch them up to that. And then for the continuity of the work, as you said, to have that more targeted approach to these groups, I would definitely feel that that's something we can do. But yeah, thank you. And as I said, any takeaways? Are your aha moments or something that got you very excited? Whatever the case may be, feel free to share in the chat or to unmute yourself. Trying to think my takeaways. The Black Student Network. Thank you, Nadine. That's lovely. Yeah. Well, for me, the takeaways, I will start with mine. It's always when I get to hear from people's, motivations for being here, but also where they come from in terms of their struggle, their lived experience, but also their dreams. As I said, I love to cover the arch between the worst and the best, between the status quo and what's possible. And from that synergy to create something that is robust enough that you're empowered in a very practical way to make the changes you need to institute to, maximize your ability to be a leader of impact. Yes. And also the fun part, like Nadine is, mentioning, it was really to look for models. There are so many possibility models. It's just that a lot of the time too, something that occurred to me is people that are doing the work don't necessarily use our labels. So if we're Googling them, we put them in a box that they don't necessarily see themselves in, but when we appreciate the work at face value, we recognize that actually those values are decolonial, or this is anti-oppression work, or this is anti-racism, and all of that. So for me, it was very beneficial to be able to reevaluate all the people that have made a dent in my history and to remove the labels to really see how they factor into what we're discussing. And that's how the list came about. So as I said, those are not the words that they use to self-identify. And at the same time, it doesn't deny that the reality of their work and impact is very much anchored in those practices, right? And they don't necessarily talk about education in their work either. However, I recognize in what they're doing a beautiful continuum that, is tethered to education itself, right? So again, that list is there. There are a few more people that I wanted to add, and I didn't have as much space, and I didn't want it to be overwhelming, but again, you will have access to those slides. Yeah. Well, I think that we might close this space a little bit earlier today, a couple minutes ahead, if nobody wants to share anything for the time being. But yes, as Anna is saying, thank you so much for everyone for being here. The people who were there in person was really lovely, and the whole staff, the team at Fourth Space. And a special thanks as well to Nadine and Brett for your comments and your participation, really much appreciated. I hope it served you in the work that you're doing, and that it gives you, yes, feeling of what's possible and empowerment, but also tangible ways to, institute and impose yourself as a leader of impact in your field. So yeah, I think Anna will pass it on to you. Yeah. Oh, my bad.
Thanks to everybody for participating online and in person, and we had a great conversation workshop today. Yeah, thanks from everybody here at Fourth Space. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. We're going to close up the Zoom.
Well,
Thank you.